Yestermorrow Design Build School in Waitsfield, Vermont presents Doorways to Design, the 2015 Summer Lecture Series. Tonight, Biophilic Dwelling, the integration of nature with home design, with Dr. Katelyn P.C. Hudson, a Vermont-based architectural designer and writer, and graduate of the Frank Lloyd Wright School of Architecture and the doctoral program in architecture at the University of Hawaii at Manoa.
My presentation tonight is on biophilic dwelling, emphasis on the residential side of things, since we spend a lot of our time at the workplace, which could be an office or a hospital, but we spend even more time, in theory, 2/3 of our time, at home. And so isn't that space just as important as where you're working or you're being treated to be considered for your connection with nature? How I got interested in biophilic design. When I was at Taliesin one summer, we were having a discussion over dinner about buildings that one of my professors had visited, and he said there was this one in Berlin that had the highest suicide rate in the world. I found that fascinating. I wanted to know why. That disturbed him a little bit. But I wanted to know why so I could analyze it and not do that. How to make better buildings, not homicidal architecture. I don't know if this is actually the building he was talking about. He denies telling me this story, and I've never found any evidence of it, but that's where this kernel of thought started to come from. So a little quick history about biophilic design, which I touched on a little bit. It started with the concept of biophilia. One of the first notable users of the term biophilia was Edward O. Wilson. He's mostly science-based. So he's looking at the desire to reconnect with nature or natural systems, that we are genetically predisposed to prefer natural aspects. We are humans, but we are also animals. In our history, we connected through nature, through caves, through hunting, gathering. We've removed ourselves slightly from that, but we can still integrate elements of that within our architecture. From there, Edward O. Wilson and our friend Stephen Kellert published a book together called The Biophilic Hypothesis, where Kellert started interjecting more of a link between biophilia and the concept of architecture and how it can impact our built environment, predominantly focusing on the productivity and the recovery rates of patients. So we're back in the workplace in the hospitals. But in 2004, Stephen Kellert, along with some other professionals coming together for a conference, created this idea of biophilic design. And from that conference, created this book that I highly recommend reading, called Biophilic Design. And that's where all of this got started 11 years ago. And over the last decade, much more research has come from this. And out of the 3 segments of my thesis, environmental psychology, biophilic design, and feng shui, this was the most interesting because it's a burgeoning concept within the architectural community. So jumping right into my idea of biophilic dwelling, there are 3 main relationships that you have from nature that can impact our health. You have the cognitive functionality and performance, psychological health and well-being, and physiological health and well-being. And we'll go over those more in detail with different patterns that have been identified within people's living and work habits that can be addressed within architecture. I don't know if anyone's read Pattern Language. A lot of that, even though it came before biophilic design, a lot of it's still relevant within that. That was really a pivot point in my thesis between the 3 methodologies. So the first group of patterns are nature within space. These are going to be all the ones within the the nature within space patterns. The first one is view connections with nature. So this is inside your space, being able to see, just seeing nature within your space, which is fairly obvious. We live in Vermont. This is wonderful. We have beautiful views. But this also has to do with living systems and natural processes within the space. So as much as we really hate winter, or some people do. That's part of the process. Being embodied within the spring, summer, fall, winter process should be incorporated within your space. So examples of how this can be used, natural flow of body of water in your property lines, flower gardens, edible gardens, having animals or insects. I know we don't really like insects, but they remind of its nature. Fossils, you can get nice slabs for your kitchen with fossils, bringing back that nice natural aspect. Terrain, soil, and earth. And we can also simulate this pattern. Ideally, you want to go with a natural method versus a simulated, but not everyone has the bounty that we have here in Vermont, and we need to cater to them as well. So a mechanical flow of body of water, that'll do it. That'll get you the sounds, that'll get you the nice visual, the sunlight going off of that. A koi pond or aquarium, green wall, artworks depicting natural scenes. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about how beneficial having natural artwork within a hospital room is to patients. Well, if it's good for them, why isn't it good for you in your home? So let's gear towards that as well. Even a video depicting natural scenes. And highly designed landscapes are also falling into the simulated. If you think back to the Rococo in England, they're very highly stylized landscaping that it looks natural, but maybe not for England at the time. It brings back nature, but it's not really natural nature. If that makes sense. And for this element, you want to have biodiversity versus acreage area quantity, so quality over quantity. You don't want to just plaster the whole thing with whatever element you're doing. You want to focus your effort on that one element and make sure it's a really good one. And ideally, people want to have visual connections that are at least 5 to 20 minutes per day. Now here in Vermont, that's pretty easy. That's our commute to work. We're connecting to nature, seeing the trees along the highway or wherever you're going. But still, to have that in your home, this isn't something you can overdose on. And when you're doing your spatial layout within your home and you want to take advantage of the views outside, make sure you do your spatial layout to take advantage of that. Don't impede it with furniture layout or how you organize your windows if you're starting from scratch. If your building's already built that way, yeah, you could add a window, but take advantage of what you have. Don't work against yourself. The benefits that this has: lowered blood pressure and heart rate, improved mental engagement and attentiveness, and it positively impacts the attitude and overall happiness of the users of the space. So non-visual connections with nature. So we're talking about the other 4 senses: smell, hearing, touch, and taste. I'm not saying you should go up and look buildings, but these 4 will be just as positive as just seeing stuff. So you want to engage your space with all 5 senses, not just seeing it, maybe touching it. So having fragrances, natural fragrances within your space with local flowers or herbs from your property. Having songbirds. Flowing water will have the sound. Experiencing the weather, like I was saying before. One thing that I have worked with clients on is when they have their house and their garage, they want a little breezeway connecting their house to their garage, so they're never going to go outside and experience nature. This drives me nuts. But that's not something I can change with them. That is something they want. I encourage them to experience nature. What's going to happen when you get out of your car when you're somewhere else? You're going to get wet. It's going to rain on you. You've got to shovel your driveway, maybe. You're still going to experience nature. It's a good thing. Natural ventilation, using textured materials so that you get your touch, so it's not just smooth. So using stone or wood or fur that has a texture to it. Having a crackling fireplace. We have winter. We have a need for fire. It's a good thing. Having sun patches that you visually see, that just the stimulation of that will help with feeling warmer, and warmer, cool surfaces. For simulated, you can have digital simulations of sounds, natural sounds. Not as great as the real natural one because it won't have that random aspect to it that listening to a real songbird would have versus listening to a CD, which the next time you listen to the CD, it'll be the same. Mechanically released natural plants and oils. Once again, it's good, it's consistent, it doesn't have that act of randomness, which is the next element. Having highly textured fabrics and textiles that mimic natural materials, audible and physical access to water features, artificial water features, music that has fractal qualities. Fractals are amazing and awesome and should be used in everything. Everyone familiar what fractals are? So a fractal is a mathematical pattern that, how is it explained? You have the whole, and it's made up of little parts that are similar to the whole, so it keeps replicating itself. And it has this it's a little very consistent, but has a randomness in that consistency. How it was explained to me was if you take a piece of the Lake Champlain shoreline, just a little piece of it, you don't know what piece that is, but it is a piece of the whole, and it's replicated throughout it. Not sure if that explains it better or worse. But it can be within music, it can be within visual imageries. You can use it in an architectural building. Just different patterns used at different scales. Having flower gardens, edible gardens, domesticated pets and animals, though these can also be a random element, but being able to pet your animal is great, and it's a great stress release. They found that in hospitals. That's why they have therapy dogs and cats and rabbits and whatever else they have now going into hospitals. So having a pet that you can actually pet is a good thing. And also, they included honeybee apiaries. That has the auditory, and it has nice side benefit of honey. So really what we're looking for is natural elements versus urban elements. That's not really a problem that we have here in Vermont. Even Burlington, not that urban. We like to think it is, but it's not. Got very good access to green space in Burlington and access to natural wildlife in Burlington. And a lot of these versus the visual, you've got one view from your house through your window. Where this, you can have your little bubbling spring and you can access it throughout your site. So versus having one source with one access point, this you can have one source with many access points. That's the benefit of having the other four senses engaged as well. And ideally, you want to experience these the same amount of time as you're experiencing the visual, so 5 to 20 minutes a day, which I'm sure that's not a problem for us here in Vermont. And these reduce your systolic blood pressure and stress hormones, positively impact cognitive performance, perceived improvements in mental health and tranquility. We all want that. One thing you'll start noticing that a lot of these will reference each other, that you can build upon each other, but as well as building upon each other, some of them can be contradictory to each other. And so if you're working with clients or working with yourself, you need to identify what your goal is and how best to approach that. Maybe it's just one of these patterns. Maybe it's 3 or 4 of them. But you want to make sure you analyze it and make sure that it's positive, not detrimental. Non-rhythmic sensory stimuli. So these are random and ephemeral connections with nature that can be analyzed statistically, but may not be predicted precisely. I've got a woodchuck, because for about 7 years, we had a woodchuck in our yard that would come and eat our hosta. And then after 7 years, it just stopped. We still had a woodchuck, but he was very random and decided that year we could have our hosta. and it hasn't come back and eaten it yet. So we're waiting for that cycle to start up again. But they add a nice random element. What plant are they going to eat this year? More natural causes: cloud movements, breezes, plant life rustling, water babbling, insect and animal movements, like my woodchuck friend, birds chirping, and fragrant flowers and trees and herbs. The simulated difficulty creating mechanical moving objects. So when we look at, we could have a robot woodchuck out there, but we could program it to eat my hosta, but it would do that every year. So we have a hard time getting that random element. Even with complex algorithms, you'll still get an air of predictability. We still don't have that completely random that nature gives us. So having my woodchuck robot would be great. I could tell it which plants to eat, which plants not to eat, but it wouldn't be as beneficial as my furry friend in the backyard. Billowing fabric and screen materials that move and glisten with light and breezes will give you that random feeling because it's nature helping push that along. Reflections of water on a surface, shadows or dappling light, changes with movements over time, natural sounds broadcast at an unpredictable intervals, and mechanically released plant oils. Still not as random as we really want it to be, but can't really help that. The frequency of this experience can be every 20 minutes for about 20 seconds. So when you go to your eye doctor and they say you should look up from your computer screen and look far away for every 20 minutes, that has partially to do with this to connect you back with nature. And it's also these non-predictable ones help with our seasonal changes, because while you're watching a flower bloom through the spring, then it dies, then it comes back, and it's creating that non-rhythmic. Yes, it always comes back in the spring if you're a really good gardener, but it might not always come back at the same time, creating a slight random element to this for you. This positively impacts heart rate, systolic blood pressure, and sympathetic nervous system activities, observed and qualified behavior measures of attention and exploration. All good things. So thermal airflow and variability. So this room's starting to get warm. It's a good thing. It's creating variability for us in this room. Just keep going with that as you sweat. It's okay. Subtle changes in the air temperature, relative humidity, airflow across the skin, and surface temperature that mimics natural environments. One thing, love the passive house movement. It's amazing, but a lot of it is so controlled that you can control what your temperature is all the time, and it will be consistent. That's not what it's like in nature. Open a window. So with natural, you have solar heat gain, shadow shade, radiant surface materials, space place orientation. So which room are you in? Which way does it face? That'll impact what you want to do in that space. Especially in Vermont with the winters, the nights are so long and dark. That's a good thing, that we've got that cycle going within us, and at least what I've observed over time, it's great for our roads because it gives our road people a deadline. In Arizona and Hawaii, their construction projects just go on for weeks. So this gives us a finite deadline of it gets too dark too early, it's too cold to do stuff, so our roads get done. Same with construction projects with your house. So for simulated, you can have HVAC delivery systems, system controls, window glazing and treatments, window operability and cross ventilation. One thing to really keep in mind that you want your building airtight. You want it really nice, sealed, so in winter you're not leaking air. But make sure the system you put in, you can modify and change so it isn't that one flat temperature all the time, that it can fluctuate over time with the sun's patterns. I mean, you don't want the same flat temperature being maintained if the sun's starting to heat up. You want it to be able to balance with that. And you want the users to be able to control their environment. It'll make them feel happier. Your clients, you yourself will be happier if you can control the temperature within your space. This will positively impact comfort, well-being, and productivity, positively impact your concentration, and improve the perception of temporal and spatial pleasure. So we can start that wood stove in the middle of winter and feel really good about ourselves because it's warm now inside versus 10 below outside. So the presence of water. I've mentioned water in several of the other patterns, but it deserves its own special place because it's a very important element that we don't necessarily engage in our homes or built environment very much, mostly because it freezes in the winter for us, but we can still bring it inside or bring it onto our property. So natural examples, rivers, streams, oceans, ponds, wetlands. We don't really have oceans, but we have rivers and streams and ponds and lakes. And those bring with them, tying into the auditory, the views. So you want to have visual access to them. You also, rainfall. That's part of water, so you want visual access to the rain. You want to see it, so then you know if it's going to flood. Simulated water, you can have water walls. Those don't seem to be as popular here in Vermont. Constructed waterfalls, aquariums, fountains, constructed streams, seeing the reflection of water on other surfaces. That'll still harken you back to water elements. Really what you want is a multi-sensory water experience. So not just seeing it, but you want to be able to touch it. You want to be able to hear it. Could go lick it if you want. Naturally fluctuating water movements will take that air of predictability out of that, which will bring us to our random patterns. You want to stay away from high volume, high turbulent water features because that'll start making people more anxious. And also, if you're working with a client or yourself and you have issues with water, stay away from water. We will get to that in a later pattern about how humans actually want a little bit of fear in their homes. The one thing with water and bringing it inside the house is it can have a lot of sapping of your energy. If you have a fountain, it has to be plugged into the wall. And so you want to be aware that there are less energy intensive patterns. So this one might want to go on the back burner if that's an issue. So it'll reduce stress, increase feelings of tranquility and lower heart rates, blood pressure, improve concentration and memory restoration, enhance perception and psychological responses, observe preference and positive emotional responses. So water is good if you want it. So dynamic and diffused light. We've touched upon this in some of the other ones, kind of like water. And you want to have this. This is part of what ties us back into the circadian rhythms. So you want daylight from multiple angles within a room, direct sunlight, diurnal and seasonal light. Firelight's good. Moonlight and starlight is great when we have it, which at least we do have clear skies here in Vermont. Simulated, you have low glare electrical light sources, different light distribution, daylight preserving light, window treatments, personal use, and dimming controls, going back to people being in control of their space. It's a good thing. And also you can get lighting now that follows the circadian rhythms. That's new to me, but it's great to be able to replicate just a little bit more what the natural elements are. But really, once again, natural over simulated is always better. But with long winters, with long nights, we need to have some artificial light. Having dynamic light can positively impact circadian system functioning and increase visual comfort. Having the natural light is much more gentler on your eyes versus artificial light. And our last one in the nature and the space, connection with natural systems, awareness of natural processes, especially the seasonal and temporal changes, characteristic of a healthy ecosystem. So Vermont, we have a relatively healthy ecosystem compared to the rest of the US, which we're very lucky. So we do get natural climate and weather patterns. hydrology, geology, animal behaviors, going back to our woodchuck friend, pollination, growth, aging, and decomposition. Yeah, death is part of life, and it's part of nature. And so seeing your poor trees shed their leaves in the winter, it's sad, but it's part of it. And it's what a lot of us have grown up with, and so it's positive in our accounting of how our year is going. Diurnal patterns, night sky and cycles, and seasonal patterns. Simulated, you can get simulated daylighting systems, get wildlife habitats that are reconstructed, exposure to water infrastructures, and the natural patina of materials. That one gets me most excited. If you're putting up a building which has a lot of materials in it, which we do, choose materials that age, like copper. It'll give your building a little randomness to it, and it will change it over time, and embrace that change. It's kind of exciting to think that your building, even after you're done, will continue evolving and changing over time. At least it does for me. So you also using rainwater catchment within your landscape. So you're harvesting what you're going to use to propagate your natural system, what you're going to use to get your view that you want. And this will enhance positive health responses and shift your perception of the environment. I think we all have a pretty healthy perception of the environment, but for other people, it'll help them realize, oh, catching the rainwater, it's good. It's not for just those nuts over there. I can do this too. So the next group, natural analogues patterns. So we looked at spaces, now we're looking at patterns that can be within the spaces. So biomorphic forms and patterns. Symbolic references to contour, pattern, texture, numerically arrangements that persist in nature. I used biomorphic instead of biomimicry. Copying nature will not really serve us that well, just direct copying it. Instead, study what you want in nature, learn from its aspects, and reinterpret it for what it is within your space. Don't take a cactus that you really like and put spines on your wall. What do you like about your cactus? What do you find interesting about it? Research it, learn about it, and then take that aspect of it and apply it to the wall. If you like the spines, go for it. Put the spines on the wall. But the cactus has a lot more to offer than spines. So this can happen in fabrics, carpets, wallpaper designs, window details, installations of freestanding sculptures, furniture details, woodworking, wall decals, and even just the whole building. One thing Frank Lloyd Wright did was study the natural patterns and reinterpret them and use them in his buildings. One of the most famous and obvious examples are his stained glass windows. He didn't necessarily do it, but one of his assistants did it, so yeah, it's got Frank Lloyd Wright's name. But you studied the natural element, you took what you needed from that natural element, and he boiled it down and created this beautiful artwork based off of that. And so you have that connection to nature without a picture of a cactus. He has one famous one of saguaros that is beautiful. This will enhance positive health responses and observe view preferences. So material connection with nature. This is probably the most obvious with the field of architecture. We're using natural materials, so we're connecting to nature naturally. Even if you look back at the Art Nouveau movement with their introduction of steel, they took that steel and they formed natural forms out of it with these very circuitous detailing. So even steel can be used, or other synthetic concrete can be used to create natural evoking materials. Just using a heavy aggregate in your concrete will bring the stone up and make the concrete just a little more relatable for us. So using it accent details, if you or your clients aren't all gung-ho, let's go natural. Just having the little accent details. Interior surfaces, woodworking or stonework, and using a natural color palette. Now, you can have a whole other lecture on color theory, but just being aware of what you want to use your color for. Green is great. It's wonderful. It is a beautiful color. It relates us to nature, but it also has this wonderful side effect of killing sexual drive. So do not put it in your bedroom. The Amish put it in their bedroom for exactly that reason. So be aware of the color that you are looking for and what that might evoke and what you want that room to evoke. So some form or function you can use this in: wall construction, structural systems, using heavy timber, or like I was saying, the Art Nouveau with their steel that was very floral or viney. Facade materials, furniture form, or even using it in hardscaping. Be aware of the function of the space. You want to vary up your materials. You don't want the whole thing to be one palette. You want to have a little variation through your house. And, use real materials over synthetic wherever possible. This will decrease your diastolic blood pressure, improve creative performance, and improve your comfort in your space. We relate better to having natural materials. Complexity and order. This one is always a little complex for me. You want rich sensory information that adheres to a spatial hierarchy to those encountered in nature. This is really getting into fractal geometries and hierarchies. So in this photograph, you see a hierarchy between the blank space, the pattern, and then another blank space, so that the complex part of it jumps out at you. If the whole thing was that pattern, it might not jump out at you as much. So using complexity with order will help aid in the awareness of the complex system that you want to be focused on. If we painted this room with stripes, it would be overwhelming. And it would be stressful. And you wouldn't fully appreciate what the stripe might indicate. Where if we did 3 stripes down the middle of the room, if they had a certain pattern, let's say we did it out of bamboo, you would more fully appreciate that bamboo in that concentrated area versus having it plastered over the whole wall. That makes more sense? This can also, our lives have complexity and order to it. Our communities have complexity and order to it. And ideally, you want your buildings to fit in with it. So be aware when you're doing if you're doing a new building, or if you're doing a renovation, how does what you're doing fit within the whole? So we have a slight responsibility to interact with that. It might be that you want to interact totally differently with it than what it is there. Own it. Do that. But be aware of that so you know what you're doing, what the ramifications might be based on that. So the next set of patterns are nature of the space. Prospect. The unimpeded view of an overall distance for surveillance and planning purposes. We're animals. We want to feel safe in our homes, especially our homes. This is where, we've got our little young, we've got our food stores. We want to be protective. So prospect gives us ideally that view of what's coming. So you know if that bobcat's coming to get you or not. You want to have, ideally, and in Vermont we're lucky we can have this, focal lengths of greater than 20 feet, and you don't want obstructions more than 42 inches high. So even if it's not your whole home, but within your home, rooms, with your kitchen, people hate having their kitchen stove with their back to a door. It's just a pattern. It's something that's been bred into us because that is our workspace. And you don't want someone sneaking up behind you in your workspace. They might attack you. They might kill you, and you want to be able to see them and react to them with appropriate time. So this can be applied within your home. This can be applied outside your home. Which that's something that comes up in feng shui a lot too, is how things are organized. If you're familiar with the command position, whoever is the most dominant in a space, you want to have access to wherever the entry point is. So right now, I'm in the dominant position because I can see all the doors. You guys are in subdominant positions. And also, when planning your bedrooms, feng shui and biophilic design, you want your bed in the dominant position. You want your kids' beds not in a dominant position. You don't want them dominant over you. You want to make sure you got a hierarchy in your house. Unless you want your kids to have the full run of the house, then yeah, by all means, put their bed facing the door. By taking these into consideration, it'll reduce your stress. You won't be looking over your shoulders quite so much. It'll reduce boredom, irritation, and fatigue. It takes a lot of effort to constantly be aware of what's going on. And it'll improve comfort and perceived safety. Today's day and age, with technology, we don't have the same predators or threats to our house, but we still have that innate behavior within us. So just orienting your house to make your behavior happy, even if a bobcat isn't going to come and attack you in your sleep, you'll sleep easier at night. Refuge. This kind of goes hand in hand with prospect. It's a place for withdrawal from the environment conditions or the main flow of activity in which the individual is protected from behind, overhead. American society is great for this. We all have our house. Everyone has their own individual bedroom. That is your place of refuge. Maybe spouses share a bedroom. They might have an office. So someone might have, that's their refuge. But with American society and how we build our houses, it's been great how we've created our own refuge. Might not be necessary. Just a niche or a nook might be enough. In pattern language, they recommend having little sleeping nooks off to the side. I've never seen one in today's society, but it sounds like a great idea for kids. So you have your own space that is uniquely yours, that ideally you can shut off with a door, with a curtain that will create an auditory or visual separation from the main space, just to give you a break, a place to get away from everything that's going on. This will improve concentration, attention, and once again, perception of safety. So mystery, the promise of more information achieved through partially obscured views and other sensory devices that entice the individual to travel deeper into the environment. So Frank Lloyd Wright was famous for this. You would walk up to the house and where's the front door? He would tuck it around a corner. So you kind of have to have this little sense. It would put the user coming to the house on a little unequal footing than the person inside, because you're like, oh, where's the door? And it kind of gets you a little agitated until you finally get in, and then you have a sense of relief. But it helps control the space for the people inside, but it gives the people outside just that little adrenaline rush of, okay, where is it? So this is mostly achieved with shorter views and higher things that will obscure the view. You notice this little path kind of winds away, and you can kind of see a house in the background. You don't quite know how to get there, but it kind of gets you going, and you want to figure out how. Auditory stimulation can aid in this, helping wind people around. Windows that are partially revealed, curving edges. People naturally wander, not in a straight line, so this also plays into that, where hallways in a straight line, that's not really natural for people. We want to kind of roam and ramble. Light and shadow, sound and vibration sense, evoking those other senses that we have that we don't use as much. Using flowing, translucent materials, organically evolved mystery conditions that change characteristics over time. We're great with our seasons, so this path won't look the same in winter It won't look the same in fall. It won't look the same in spring. So it will create a different mystery for you each time. And they've found that this does induce a strong pleasure response. While some people might find it stressful to not know where you're going, but a lot of people are like, ooh, what's around the next corner? And then risk and peril. This is getting back to that water thing I was talking about earlier. Identifiable threat coupled with the reliable safeguard. So you don't just want the risk, you do want to know you will get through that risk. A lot of spatial attributes that we see, heights, so using double height spaces in the room, it kind of makes you feel a little pushed down upon by the gravity, but it creates this risk and peril because you go from that double height space to a hallway, and so you've got that, oh, I made it through. Or doing a birdhouse or a tree house with a walkway. That'll get you going a little bit if you're afraid of heights. Gravity and water. So architectural cantilevers. Infinity edges on pools where it just looks like the water goes off and then plummets. Using a facade that's floor-to-ceiling transparency. Feeling like there's no boundary, that you'll just keep going. But once you reach that, it's, okay, yeah, that's there. It might not hold me, but it's at least there. Objects that are perceived to be defying or testing gravity. Proximity to apiaries or predatory animals. But, safe distance from the predatory animals if they're wild. Definitely with this, you want to be aware of your user's comfort level. You don't want to unnecessarily stress your clients out. If they're afraid of heights, don't design them a tree house. If they're allergic to bees, do not put a beehive near them. So this one is a little tentative, that it needs a lot more attention to it than some of the other ones. And this, if you're comfortable with it, it can result in a strong dopamine or pleasure response. So you've got that built up stress, and then it's released. And so it's that release that's positive for the users. Design strategies. Client's intention. What is your client's intention? They might want nothing to do with biophilic dwelling. They might not know what it is. You might be able to subtly sneak some things through. But you've got to find out what is their goal in their space. What do they want to do? And oh, by the way, I've got this great technique that we can use within that space that'll make it better. Don't have to wrap it up in biophilic dwelling. You can just tell them, this is what this is the positive impact that it can have on the people. Sometimes they will want to just whitewash the whole building with biophilic dwelling or design, and that's great, and you can do that. But sometimes you'll have to identify that little tiny piece within it that they're interested in. One thing that's great about this is it's flexible and replicable. Like I said before, a lot of these patterns can build upon each other, but you also have to be aware that they can undercut each other as well. So you want to have a positive group that will feed upon each other to make the space better. Quality versus quantity. Quality of your work, don't just cover the whole thing. You don't want this whole room in stripes, once again. It can just overwhelm whatever your goal is you're hoping to achieve. And then exposure. Be aware of the duration or need of the client's exposure to the desired intervention. Some of these, I mentioned a time recommendation. With the fear and peril, you don't want to be exposed to that fear overly long. So being aware of what the desired amount of time of interacting with your certain pattern. Some of these, you can just be exposed to it all the time, and it's beneficial over time. So like a view. I don't know how a view could be detrimental to you. So having a view is great. You'll start to ignore it after a while. But it's always positive. It's always still going through your head, that natural view. one thing that's very important within biophilic design and biophilic dwelling is locally appropriate design. I went to grad school in Hawaii, and I spent 3 years trying to design footings that were too deep and asking questions about snow loads. And they thought I was crazy for going there and then coming back here. But I appreciate going there because I pushed other people to understand about snow and the importance of winter. But really knowing where you are and what your climate is going to be like, what the ecology and the vernacular is. The ecology, climate, and vernacular here is totally different than Hawaii. They would eat up all this stuff so easily with not having to heat, not having to worry about a stream running straight through their house. What are they going to do in the winter? Where here in Vermont, we have to be more aware of that. We can't just have a river running through our house. It's not going to work. But beneficial, local materials, respond to the topography and climate. You have the character and density of where you're building. So rural environments provide more human-nature relationships than an urban environment. Suburban environments, it's hit or miss. I mean, they've got lawns, nice manicured lawns, but they evoke this sense of savanna that humans, where we evolved from, that's what we were used to. So that is why suburbia has savannas. They're trying to get back to their little savanna, and so they've got their little manicured lawn with a little tree and a fence. You gotta have that fence, you gotta have that refuge. We don't have quite the urban environment, but with an urban environment, you require much more creative solutions for how you're gonna interact with nature. Where in suburbia, especially in Vermont, we can put a wash line out, and that'll give us that connection to the wash naturally drying. That'll create one of those rhythms. There's other things that we can do within our environment, specifically in Vermont and suburbia, because we have laws in place that allow us to do that. So you can get creative with your little suburban lot. Scale and feasibility. What is appropriate to the surrounding environment? You don't want to build a skyscraper next door to here. That's not really appropriate. So you just want to be aware of what else is around you. Might be a really green skyscraper, but it's not really what this area needs or wants or will fit in. And also cultural demographics, which I find interesting because they change over time. With biophilic dwelling, there's a difference in what males versus females need. And also age range. So what your client at 30 might need will not be what they need when they're 60. And so to be able to adapt your designs and be aware of that over time, I think is very interesting. Might create a more dynamic building. And at least culturally, there's not a lower or higher appreciation between different cultures, but there's a difference in expectations of what they believe nature is. So in Vermont, we have a fairly clear idea of what we think nature is, but New York City doesn't have that same idea. In Africa, they don't have that same idea. Over in Asia, they have a totally different idea. And so learning what your client's expectation is for nature will help you better accommodate what their needs are within their spaces and make the space more successful for them.
That was wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thanks.